Mera, a Gothic tale by Rolando Enrique Rosales Murga. I'll try to keep my wits about me before I begin my story. That said, my blood runs cold just remembering it. The fate of Tse, the character from whom I descended, how I met him, and how I visited the city of Mera in burst, a forbidden city that doesn't open its doors to just anyone. My whole life has been one of hedonism. At that time, I was still mourning the loss of my beloved Ceci, and I would still go to talk to my brother's grave in the early hours of the morning. That night I was drunk. I caught a glimpse of Ulysses Elwyn approaching an old grave I had never seen before. He approached it, and suddenly it began to sink into the ground. My eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. I tried to compose myself, left the cemetery, and stayed at the small sports complex smoking. Suddenly, as I was smoking my fifth cigarette, I saw a young man of Mayan descent walking toward the cemetery, almost hypnotized, as if a strange voice in his head were guiding him. I followed him, keeping a safe distance. To my surprise, and confirming my predictions and fears, he arrived at the same spot, unaware that I was watching him as he entered. Suddenly, someone tapped my shoulder and looked me in the eyes. It was a figure dressed entirely in black, with gleaming eyes that seemed to blaze, and I thought I heard screams as his gaze performed that rhythmic dance. I was horrified. I mustered enough courage to ask who he was, found the courage to question him, and asked, "Are you the hunter, the despicable 2.5 meter tall being noted, which nearly made me let go of the rope?" But he pointed the way to that tomb. At that moment, my adventurous instinct overpowered me. I felt safe, but this would not last long. I began to descend and came upon some underground steps. They were incredibly and macabrely formed from intertwined skeletal structures, all artfully arranged. I kept going down. It stank even worse than the putrid stench of hell. There were walls curiously adorned with amethysts, fiery stones, and basalt. The place was swirling with hills. There were stalactites and stalagmites, all made of bone. To my horror, there was an entrance that resembled a giant ribcage. Beside it, at the end of the path, stood a person. I almost fainted when I realized how incredibly alike we were. "Welcome, my ancestor. My name is Say," murmured that strange carbon copy. Only a strand of gray hair in his long hair set us apart. He invited me to enter the place where few living beings ventured. He motioned with his fingers for me to follow him. I acted almost out of inertia. I was already inside. I didn't want to do of what might be in that place to torment me and keep me awake, which would have been preferable had I known of the horrors that the fiery and bitter Lake Mara would offer. A kaleidoscopic lake of an unnameable stench, and in the abandoned and ancient, not to mention horrifying and evil birds, long in conflict with Kashat, a land of vampires and witches, which they said had a dimensional opening in the Izalco volcano and another in Samayak, Suchitepeques. His shot had allied itself with commerce, work's eternal enemy. This was recounted to me by Ulysses Valenzuela, the famed Wing, who, so they said, was a natural born necromancer capable of transforming into an animal. Besides drinking the pus of the dead at night, it was easy to extract information from him. After a couple of shots of rum, he became talkative, but that's another story. It seemed to me it was barely 1:30 in the morning. With feverish steps, I scrutinized every detail of that place. Suddenly, I stumbled upon something that let out a wail. I couldn't get over my astonishment when the hunter behind me handed me a torch of strange white fire. It was an anthropomorphic being. I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Even now, the memory horrifies me. It was a creature with the body of a snake and the face of a woman. It had small wings, which made me think it might be a lamia. In its mouth was a rotting human arm. I kept walking in utter terror, shaking my head violently from side to side, as if trying to stay sane. But this bastard of a creature was closing in on me, trying to block my path, and perhaps seeing me as dinner. The hunter touched my shoulder and pointed the white torch at it, which I used to defend myself against that scaly monstrosity. I had to burn it, but it bit off a bit of the light, which swelled its stomach, causing it to spew foul-smelling smoke from its mouth and nose, which were horrifically deformed, and apparently it fainted. The light was formed from eternally punished souls, used for their activities like the most common tools to us. The weak mortals who know less than we imagine. We kept walking. Ulysses was on the path. He recognized me and shouted, "Pupil, good to see you. You've arrived. We were expecting you." Beside him stood a being with the appearance of a woman, but her wings gave her away. He introduced me to that strange figure. Her name was Srabatman. According to Ulysses, that infernal name made the blood run cold when spoken. I then remembered the hellish and grotesque female creatures who take pleasure in copulation. I had just observed a succubus for the first time. I felt both amazed and unsettled. I didn't even believe I was in that place, which suddenly turned upside down. My temples felt as if they were about to explode from sensing such supernatural activity in a single night. Finally, I arrived in Mara. My guide and my two old friends showed me something interesting. That young man whom had entered, who, who had that young man whom had seen enter was sinking into a filthy pool of blood and colors that were utterly repugnant and foul-smelling. Ulysses explained about him. In turn, he told me about him. He was called Gamaliel, but had a curse. He had died long ago through a horrendous ritual. He was reanimated, knowing that at 12:30 p.m. he must return to this place, in the very bowels of those mind-boggling world. I wanted to smoke, but the stench wouldn't even let me think. He slowly merged with those murky waters. In his place, many hands blocked the way, forming a tree with a book in a small hollow. I slowly approached the spot and brandished the book. It was the book of San Cipriano. I would never in my life have seen one otherwise. Then, a grotesque, gigantic being detached itself from the wall. It spoke in somewhat in unintelligible Latin. Hail, O King Satan, who instills fear in men. As soon as I heard this, I wanted to flee, but I couldn't. I until I threw the torch at Ulysses, who was simultaneously struck by millions of arms, which in turn plunged him into the fetid lake of mud and blood. Mara, I ran violently, reached the entrance, and lost consciousness. The next day, I woke up locked inside a tomb with two large blows to my head. Had I fallen? I assumed it had all been a dream, but when they took me to the hospital, one of the police officers fearfully handed me the book of San Cipriano, raising doubts as to whether I had read it. I knew I would be taken for a grave robber, had to slip away, so 3 days later, at dawn, I escaped from the hospital, making my way to the cabin of a girl who had once been a prostitute. We had a passionate affair, and she kindly took me in. Then I left for El Salvador. I had to find the entrance to Izalco, but something stopped me, and I stayed in Chalchuapa, Santa Ana, in a city called San Nicolas. No one will ever look for me here, only those seeking the truth about the old forest, which I believe I have visited.